All right, rabbis, you good if we get started?
Sure.
Terrific. Okay. Thank you all for being with us tonight. We are trying to run some programs that will hopefully let you bring some new wonderful things to your Seders. We're all deeply aware that many people's Seders are not going to look or feel this year the way they usually do. Mine is certainly among those. And so we are trying to help think about ways that we can make this year special and interesting and fun for children and grown-ups of all ages, even in a time when all of the rules feel so antithetical to everything that Pesach means to many of us. So in that spirit, I am especially grateful that Rabbi Ann and Rabbi Dahlia and Rabbi Jack have prepared an evening of ideas for your Seder. As you know, we have one more Seder preparation program Monday night as we finish our last day of school pre-Pesach. We're going to do an evening on hope and texts about hope that you can bring to your Seder. But for tonight, we're going to really try to give you ideas you can use at all different parts of the evening to hopefully make your Seder as interesting and fun and accessible as it can be. So my enormous thanks to our dream team of rabbis, and I turn it over to you. If people have questions, if you use the chat function at the bottom and chat to me, I will try to insert them appropriately as this is going on. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Ann, Rabbi Dahlia, and Rabbi Jack. And it's wonderful to see everyone. All yours.
Hi, everybody. It is indeed wonderful to see many people who are beginning to think about the Seder. Like Ariella talked about, it's definitely going to be a different year for many of us and the way Seder is going to look. I know for one, I'm really thinking about in my house, it's going to be a Seder where I'm really going to be able to focus on my child. And I'm thinking about how that's going to be different. And if often we have so much company and we're with expanded family, I'm trying to think about this year as the ways in which I want to reach, in my case, my 6-year-old, and thinking about how to target the Seder around him. Tonight's program, like Ariella spoke about, we're really going to just share some texts, some insights, some ideas. Obviously, we can't cover the whole Seder. We'd be here all night and beyond, but just to give a few thoughts to send you on your way. And then at the end of the evening, we will share our document and post it so it's fully available to you. You don't have to feel like you have to jot notes down right now. We're going to screen share it with you, but we will share the document at the end so that you have full access to the sources we talked about. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and hopefully the right screen. There it is. Rabbi Ann, could you give me a thumbs up if you're seeing the right screen? Thank you. And so this is going to be our roadmap for tonight. We're going to focus on 6 categories. We'll start with an overview of the Seder. Then we'll look at a couple or 3 or 4 rituals and symbols. We'll look obviously at the 4 questions and at the 4 children. We'll look at a disagreement in the Talmud between 2 rabbis and why, to us, is a significant disagreement, a significant machloket. And then we'll close with some theological challenges that we're thinking about, particularly in light of this year and the context of where we're at this year. So we wanted to start by offering you a little bit of a roadmap, and we're thought to offer a brief roadmap. I'm sure many people know, possibly not everybody, that the Seder is really, right, people love to remind ourselves that Seder means order, and there's an order to the Seder. And there are 14 or 15, depending on how you count, parts to the Seder. I didn't want to take you through all of those. What I want to take you through is that the Seder, especially the way it was conceived in the Mishnah, is built around the 4 cups of wine. So the 4 cups of wine, the rabbis tell us, they match up to the 4 promises of redemption. That when God is speaking to Moshe at the beginning of the book of Shemot, at the beginning of the book of Exodus, in the midst of all the instructions on taking the Israelites out, and the Israelites are suffering and their work has increased, God reiterates to Moshe God's plan, and God uses the words Vehotzeti, Vehitzalti, Velakachti, Vegaalti. Four words that really mean similar things, but if I were to try to translate them differently, I'd say, and I will take them out, I will redeem them, I will save them, and I will take them. Hotzeti, I will take them out, versus I will take them to be mine. So for four words or four ideas of redemption, we drink 4 cups of wine at the Seder. The first cup of wine, we pour the wine and we recite Kiddush and we drink. Then we pour a second cup of wine, we don't drink quite yet, and that's really the heart of the Seder, where we fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment of teaching our children, or whoever we're having Seder with, the story of leaving Egypt. I would like to say that just today I was learning with my 9th grade class the Mishnah and the or a Mishnah and a section from the Talmud that talks about this commandment. And the Talmud talks about giving an example of people on their own for a Seder. So I want to know, I know there are people out there who might be having Seder all by themselves, and I encourage you to think about how you can tell the story even to yourself. The Gemara already recognized that that would be a reality for people. We don't only tell the story to our children, we tell the story to each other, we tell the story to ourselves. Over that same second cup, we talk about the foods and the symbols of the Seder. We begin to recite Hallel, and then we eat. We drink the cup, and then we eat the meal. After the meal, we pour a third cup of wine, we recite the grace after meals, and we drink. And then we pour a fourth cup of wine, we finish Hallel, we finish the praise, the songs of praise, and we drink the last cup of wine. And then at the end of the Seder, especially today, many people, the Haggadah, we add lots of singing. So that's an overall roadmap for the Seder. Rabbi Jack.
Thank you, Rabbi Dalia. What I have to share is much lower in alcohol and sugar than what you just talked about, depending on whether it's grape juice or wine. I'm going to talk a little bit about the numbers in the Seder. There are enough numbers in the Seder to play a little game of bingo, if you'd like. That's a 4. There are 2 other 4s we'll talk about. There are some 3s mixed in there. And the number I think that gets the least attention is the number 15. Dalia mentioned that there are 14 or 15 steps in the Seder. I'm arguing for 15. The disagreement is whether to separate motzi and matzah. That's what it comes down to. So I'm going to explain why the number of 15 is not coincidentally so prominent in the Seder. Of course, holidays happen on the 15th day. That's a significant number on a lunar calendar. It's a full moon. I mentioned just now 15 Seder steps. There are 15 lines to Dayenu, 15 lines to Az Yashir. And if you think about the progression of the Jewish people out of Egypt, that makes sense. That's not a coincidence. 15 words to Birkat HaKohanim, the blessing of the priests. And they're also on the southern wall of the Beit Mikdash. There are still steps, 15 steps, and there are 15 psalms that start Shir HaMa'alot, which literally is translated as the Song of Ascent. And so for every one of those steps, then there was a psalm to recite. And so just to point out that the number 15 also creates a rhythm to the Seder, and then the question is why? The obvious answer, I think, is the numerical value of God's name, which is the Yud and the Hey. And the fact that that is God's name is the reason that in Hebrew the number 15 is written Ted Vav instead, and not after Yud, and after Yud it is not Yud and then a Hey. And also just to point out that the number 15 is prominent, I think, because it does hint at the Beit Mikdash because of those 15 steps. And the only real mention of the land of Israel in the Haggadah is in Dayenu, where there's mention of Beit HaBechira, the Beit Mikdash. And so the fact that that is the 15th line doesn't seem to me to be a coincidence. And so this is another way to trace your progress and have a little fun while doing so in the Seder.
I think I'm up next, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the important rituals and symbols in the Seder, and I'm going to talk a little bit about matzah. You may be wondering what these strange pictures are. I will explain. So my teacher in rabbinical school, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, once taught me, and I've always remembered, that the verb to symbolize is a non-transitive verb, meaning it doesn't take a direct object. You can't say the Shabbat candles symbolize. You can't boil it down. The Shabbat candles symbolize. It's not one thing. And I would like to say the same about matzah, that you can't really reduce it to one thing that it symbolizes, because as you will see in the quotes that we have on the page here, matzah is both halach ma'anya, the poor bread, the bread of affliction, the bread of oppression. So it's the bread of slavery, but it's also the bread that they ate on their way out to liberation. So matzah is both the bread of freedom and the bread of slavery at the same time. And I love this idea that depending on the context, the symbol can mean one thing or its opposite at the same time. And I do a little activity in 5th grade where I use a very old ad campaign, this is like now from a very long time ago, to show how different symbols can mean different things depending on context. As you can see with the baby and the computer, which is actually pretty apt for the time that we're in right now. I'm sure that playing with our children is a welcome break and also a lot of work. And we're all doing a lot of work on our computers, but I am also using my computer to reconnect with all of my friends from high school and laugh about all the ridiculous things we did when we were 16. So, and I'm sure I don't need to explain the other two symbols to you as well. So I wanted to include these pictures to give you a chance to think about, you might even want to use them in your Seder. And what we did with the 5th graders was each of them had to think about one symbol that was both slavery and freedom to them. And one thing I'm thinking about in particular this year is this moment that we're finding ourselves in, and how it is a moment of additional oppression and additional liberation, because I do think there are ways in which I'm certainly feeling oppressed in ways that I haven't before. And there have also been some really surprising ways that it has been very liberating. John Krasinski interviewed Steve Carell the other day, and he had a suit on, and Steve Carell said to him, "I'm sure that you don't have the same bottoms as tops." So John Krasinski was liberated from the bottom half of his suit. I'm sure there are many other ways that it's actually been liberating. Oh, there's just a quote Shai Held said basically the same thing on Facebook yesterday, which I thought was kind of lovely. But I'm going to pass it along to Rabbi Jack, who's going to talk about Karpas.
Yes, that's right. My goal here is to get you excited about Karpas and Yachats in ways you haven't been before. And I actually have Rabbi Nathan Laufer to thank for this. So first, let's talk about Karpas. So actually the Karpas, now there are different traditions about what to do with Karpas. I'm campaigning strong in my house for a green vegetable because of what I learned here. We'll see how that goes. But green vegetable is a very strong symbol of the spring. And in fact, when the Haggadah elaborates on the reason for the Karpas, you see the quote there in the first bullet at the top that from Ezekiel, I made you as numerous as the plants of the field. And the whole idea of the Karpas, of a spring vegetable, is that it represents now every time I think of using the word symbolize, I have to worry about what Anne's teacher will think. But it represents the proliferation of the Jewish people. And at the beginning of Sefer Shemot, the book of Exodus, the Jewish people proliferated, and they were so reproductive, they scared Paro, basically. The Paro says that they're a threat to us because there are so many of them. And you see here, this quote associates that kind of proliferation with a green vegetable. And then we take that vegetable and we dip it into salt water. And the idea there is Paro decided that the way he was going to control and subdue the Jewish population was to subject them to labor. And so you see the quote there from Sefer Shemot, Vayavidu Mitzrayim, et b'nei Israel b'farach. And there's a lot of conversation about what that word farach actually means. Okay, most people say that it means that they were subdued with heavy labor, and that is the symbol of the salt water subduing the karpas. There's this clash, and talked about a tension between the bread of affliction and redemption. And we're going to see time and again throughout the Haggadah. This is also something to look out for throughout the Haggadah. All these symbols and ideas that are in tension, all these things that actually are meant to, it seems, play both ends. And so now, with apologies, I'm going to do something cute with the language, and I cannot blame Rabbi Nathan Laufer for this. But the whole idea of the karpas being dipped into the salt water is like the Jews basically being subdued by heavy labor, and you actually see here that karpas backwards almost is farach. And yes, the eye roll and the cringe are totally appropriate. It doesn't quite work, but I really thought that was cool when I noticed it, because really it's true that the farach was meant to reverse the proliferation of the Jewish people represented by the karpas. And now on to yachatz. Okay, I also think in a very nerdy way, this is quite cool. We have 3 matzot. Okay, there are 3 matzot. This is one of the 3s. I was talking about the bingo before. They're understood in many different ways. Kohen, Levi, and Israel is one possible way. The Kohanim, the priests, the Levim, the Levites, the Israelites, as being of course, this is not a hierarchy that everybody's comfortable with, but as a Kohen, I'm quite comfortable with it. And the middle matzah is the Levim. And we know from Sefer Shemot, the only way that Moshe's parents are introduced, the only way is as a man from the house of Levi coming and marrying a woman from the house of Levi. So we know Moshe and his siblings and his family, they are Levim, they are Levites. And so you already have a hint, the middle matzah can be associated with Moshe. And then Moshe is also a middle child, younger than Miriam and older than Aaron, which of course in the middle school resonates with me also. And so you have 2 ways in which that middle matzah actually can be associated with Moshe. And then we break the middle matzah. It's a pretty dramatic moment in the beginning. It's a beautiful Seder table, right? And like that starts making a mess. That's it. You've broken the middle matzah. It's a little like, I have a friend who studied architecture, and he had a teacher tell him that before he started drawing anything on a paper, he needed to make a scribble that was completely pointless and actually meant to mess up the paper. Or like a writer who has to get through writer's block by just writing anything. And so we break that middle matzah, we get the mess going. And so the question is, what's the meaning behind breaking that middle matzah? So Moshe had a dual identity, right? We split the matzah. He had a separate identity. He struggles between being Egyptian and Jew, at least early in his life. And then what do we do with that half matzah? And this is, I think, where it really gets amazing. We hide the matzah. And if you, of course, recall how Moshe's life was saved, the language is Vatitzpenehu Shlosha Yirachim. Moshe's parents hid him for 3 months, and the shorish of Titzpenehu is the same shorish as the word safun, which in the end is when we eat the half of the matzah that we hide, that Rabbi Laufer says represents Moshe. And I think that's really cool. A couple more points just to seal the deal, which is that Moshe is hidden in the Haggadah. Okay, so it's interesting. You have the Megillah where God is hidden, in the Haggadah, Moshe is hidden. So the hiddenness of Moshe is also represented because God wants to make sure, and now Moshe also gets a sort of a passing reference, much like I said, the land of Israel gets just a passing reference. Moshe just gets a passing reference. And in the text where we are reminded that God did this and not Moshe, you see the Rashi Tevot, the first letters of the words where I didn't put the entire quotes in there, but it's Ani velo malach, Ani velo saraf, Ani velo hashaliach. Okay, and the first letter of each of those words, it spells out Moshe's name. So Rabbi Laufer says at some level that is saying Ani velo Moshe. And so the whole idea first of sort of Moshe starting his life as a tortured soul and being divided and then being hidden. And we know he himself also ran and hid. Then him being hidden in the Haggadah, all plays out through Yachatz.
Thank you, Rabbi Jack and Rabbi Ann. I just want to take a moment to be sure to keep encouraging people that if you have a comment or a question or something that you want to clarify, please be sure to email your, not email, to put in the comment box, in the chat box, and direct it to Ariella. She's going to read them and let us know if there are questions. So I'm just going to take a pause to encourage people to really do that. And Ariella, I hope you'll just jump in and let us know when there is one.
I will. Thank you, Rabbi Dahlia.
I want to add a food at the Seder, the charoset. And in this section from the Talmud about the charoset, there's a discussion as to why is the charoset a mitzvah? Why is it a commandment? And there's, of course, a disagreement. And Rabbi Levi says that it's in memory of the apple tree, and Rabbi Yochanan says it's in memory of the mortar. So I know many of us, when we talk at the Seder, we remember that we think about the charoset as the mortar that helped to build, right, to build the pyramids and the slavery. And the apple tree piece, Rashi helps us understand even better. The apples or the sweetness or the tart in the charoset is to remember the women who had to go through childbirth without pain. And what it means that they had to go through without pain, I understand not to mean necessarily that it was completely miraculous that suddenly childbirth was pain-free, but that they couldn't express their pain. So they gave birth in somewhat in silence and far away in order to ensure the safety of their children. And in the same way as the matzah, and what Rabbi Ann talked about, when we eat charoset at our table, we try to give voice, if you will, to the voice of women who we don't remember often when we talk about the story of redemption, and to think about the women and the role that they played in ensuring during a time that was really scary, during a time that was hard to imagine a future for their children, that they continued to have hope and to go through childbirth and to bring Israelite children, soon to be Jewish children, into the world. So I'd like to encourage people to think about a new ingredient they might add to their charoset to figure out a meaning that you could think about, and to really encourage you and your family members, or if are people at your Seder with you, to think about really exploring the flavor of the charoset. Usually, I think most of us explore the texture of the charoset and think about it as mortar. And let's also explore the flavor of the charoset and think about all that we're tasting and all that we're really embodying at the Seder together.
Rabbi Dahlia, Susan had a question that I think would be great to share right now.
Great.
We can actually unmute her, Susan Cardos, and she could share it herself, maybe.
Yeah.
I got it. Thank you so much. This is really
amazing. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This is really great. I'm scared of my Seder this year. So I'm just wondering, I grew up in a house that had an empty chair and an empty place setting for the Russian Jews who are not yet released from behind the Iron Curtain. And I'm just wondering if you all have ideas about symbols that we might bring to our Seders this year that could symbolize the kind of bondage that we as a community find ourselves in right now.
So it's interesting. When I was younger and in the similar time period, Susan, my family, we didn't leave an empty chair. I didn't know about that tradition, but we read a paragraph about matzah of hope, and we read that with the breaking of the matzah that Rabbi Jack was talking about with the yachatz. I hadn't heard the teaching you shared, Rabbi Jack, about Moshe and about hidden, but thinking about the baking and thinking about matzah of hope. I don't have the text on me. I was thinking about that more for Monday night's hope session, but the matzah of hope. And then throughout time, my family updated matzah of hope for the various time periods that we were in and the type of hope that we were seeking at that time. I think I would encourage people right now to maybe craft their version of the hope that they're thinking about. That's, at least for me, I think an empty chair is an interesting question. I think right now many of us probably feel there are a lot of empty chairs at our table. Anyway, that's the one I'm thinking about. I don't know if my colleagues would like to share one.
I have an idea for a ritual later, but it's later in the Seder, so I'll come back to it.
I don't really have an answer to Susan's question, but I will say that sort of where I'm at right now is thinking about how in our Seder and in our lives we can make room for the feelings that we're having that are not. Should I keep going? Sorry. Just how we can find ways to make room for our more difficult feelings about what we're going through, and at the same time, as Rabbi Dahlia was saying, focus ourselves on hope, on optimism, on the the many blessings that have gone along with this very difficult time. So I'll keep thinking about a symbol for that. So I am going to talk about the 4 questions for a minute, and I just got finished with Unorthodox last night. I watched the last episode with the 4 questions, which were not done the way that I'm used to hearing them. It was very strange. I'm sure many of you have been watching. We're all home watching Unorthodox right now. And I wanted to point out that in the Mishnah that is the source for the 4 questions, I can't see the text because it's too small, but it says, "V'kan haben shoel aviv," and here the child, the boy, asks his father a question. V'im ein dat b'ben aviv melamdo. And if the child is not able to ask a question, then the father teaches him, and then we start with manishtana. So I want to point out that the plan A in the Mishnah is not the 4 questions. Plan A is for a child to ask an actual question, that these questions are supposed to emerge from curiosity, from things that you don't understand. And I shared, just because I thought people might want them for their Seders, some really lovely stories about questions. I'll just call your attention to I think the 3rd or the 4th one, which is a story about Rav Soloveitchik. I think it's from the Noam Sion Haggadah, that he came into class once, and of course, because it's Rav Soloveitchik, his students had prepared furiously for class, and he came in and he said, "Okay, I'll take some questions now," and there was silence in the room, and he closed his large folio-sized Gemara and said, "No questions, no shiur," and walked out. Now, if Noam Sion wrote this, I'm going to assume that it's a true story. And it speaks powerfully about the importance of questions in knowledge. And I wanted to ask us to think about, how we could bring that spirit of curiosity to the Seder, that in a way, the 4 questions are actually the opposite of what the Seder is trying to accomplish. They're questions that we all know the answers to. We've been doing them every year, right? But what would it look like for there to be questions in our Seder that really are questions that we're wondering about? What would it look like to ask everybody to bring a question to this year's Seder that's something that's really on their mind? So I want to invite that spirit of curiosity into your Seder, into my Seder, and feel free to use any of these wonderful question stories as a trigger if you'd like.
I'm just going to share.
We have sorry, Rabbi Dahlia, Susan Miller has a question.
If it's Susan Miller, I'm really happy.
That's my goal.
Okay, I unmuted myself. So my question has to do, I cannot unmute myself.
You did.
Oh, I did. Okay, it says you cannot. All right.
Nope, it wasn't her.
Every year when we try to teach, I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Keep going. Please keep going.
Every year when we read Bechol Dor Vador Chayav Adam Lirot et Atzmo Ke'ilu Hu Yatsa, this year it's the first year that it doesn't feel Ke'ilu. It doesn't feel as if I have to identify. So my question for myself and for everybody, this is something I've been thinking about, is, so with whom do I identify in this story? Do I identify with people who want to go back to what was? Afraid of moving forward? Like, where do I want to be in this kahal? Or which people do I identify with as it's not so ke'ilu? at this very moment?
Mm.
It's a great question.
Wow. I'm thinking, Susan, with what you said about how some of the texts will resonate differently. And I think about that with the Vehi She'amda, right? The prayer where we say that God has always stood by us throughout, always, but in different ways. And I'm just really thinking about, for me, what I'm a little bit hearing, although this might not be how you intended it, what I'm a little bit hearing also is the idea that it feels like we had the same ritual over and over, and this year it's going to mean different things to us. And I wanted to respond to Rabbi Ann a moment ago and suggest that I learned this week something really powerful about the Mani Shana. I've been teaching this Mishnah that Rabbi Ann, it's expanded in my 9th grade class. And we've been talking all about how the Mani Shana that becomes so central to the Seder, it wasn't even originally intended necessarily to be part of the Seder. And then I was mentioning to my 1st grader that I was teaching the Mani Shana in my 9th grade class. And he looked at me with disdain and said, "You're teaching the Mani Shana to your 9th grade class? We learn the Mani Shana. I'll teach it to them." And he came to my next Zoom class and sang the Mani Shana to them, thinking that must be what I was doing with them. I was teaching them by rote how to sing the Mani Shana. And I was thinking about how questions that are years old maybe never get old. And maybe, I don't know, maybe Rav Soloveitchik would have been happy if somebody would have asked him the same question they asked yesterday. He wasn't necessarily always looking for the new question. He was looking for the question that was on people's minds now. And that's the piece that I'm hearing also from Rabbi Ann a little bit of saying, let's let the questions that are on our mind now, let's let them be at the forefront of our Seder and not try to hide them in order to experience an emotion we're hoping to experience. But let's allow the questions to reflect where we're at, and the conversations will guide us to where we'll get to by the end. And I'll use that as my transition to the next piece, which in the same Mishnah, right after the 4 questions part that Rabbi Ann talked about, the Mishnah instructs that the father answering these questions should begin the story with degradation and conclude with praise. Obviously, in the Gemara, right immediately following, there's a machloket, there's a disagreement. And Rav and Shmuel are trying to figure out where the story begins. Does it begin, as Rav argues, with talking about our forefathers who are idolaters? Or does it begin with the idea of we were slaves? And I understand this part to really be that they're asking, the question isn't really where did the story start? The question that they're asking is, what is the story that we're telling at our Seder? What is the story about, right? Is the story a story about us becoming a people where God is at the center, right? That story, I imagine, begins with our fathers were original idol worshipers, and then we became, I don't know if it ends at Sinai. Does it end with the coming to Israel? And Shmuel suggests that the story is really about redemption. It's about becoming from slaves to free people. So it begins with Avadim Hayinu, and I ask the same question there. Does the story end with Har Sinai? Is that where freedom really is? Because when we get our own Torah is when we're free. Does it end with a parting of the sea? Because that's when our enemy seems to disappear right in front of our eyes. Where does the story end? And Rabbi Jack, when he was talking about the number 15 and thinking about what the number reminds us of and suggests us of where the story ends, if you will, before when I talked about the 4 cups, I suggested that they match the 4 words that God uses to describe the redemption that we will experience. And those 4 words are over 2 verses in the book, in that chapter. But the next verse, the very next verse, at the beginning of the verse, includes the word veheveti, and I will bring them to the land that I promised your ancestors. And so it's really an interesting question as to why that's not the 5th cup. And we might talk about that a little bit more when we get to Eliyahu's cup. And that is a question that I love to raise at my Seder, is the question of where does the story begin? Where does the story end? And what's the focus of our story? What is this real story that we're hoping to communicate at our Seder? What's the message that we want to send to ourselves, that we want to send to our children, to the family with whom we'll be celebrating? And that's a question that I'm thinking about a lot as I'm thinking about how to craft a conversation about the story and how to answer the questions that are raised. Rabbi Ann.
I'm not muted. Hi. I love it, Rabbi. Rav and Shmuel is definitely one of my favorite parts, and I had never thought about it from the perspective of it all depends on where you start the story. Many years ago, was at the bar mitzvah of, what's the actual name? Rick Moranis, the guy that was in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. At his son's bar mitzvah, I'll never forget this. He said, "My father taught me that there's only two beginnings of stories. A stranger came to town, and someone sets out on a journey." And you could look at, we were idol worshipers as someone sets out on a journey. Avram sets out on a journey, and Avadim Hayinu is a stranger comes to town, Moshe comes, and everything starts to change. So that is not related to what I was going to say about Rav and Shmuel, but I just, Rabbi Dalia made me think about it. So my sort of riff on what Rabbi Dalia already started is that these two beginnings famously speak about the two different kinds of slavery, both the physical slavery of enslavement and the spiritual slavery of idolatry. And I feel like this fits in with my overall theme tonight of sort of the multivalence of symbols, that the concept of Avdut is complicated, right? That these two beginnings, idol worship versus slavery, raises the question of what true enslavement is. So in the lower school, every child knows how to sing, Avadim Hayinu Ata B'nei Chorin, right? We were slaves and now we're free. But it's worth remembering that from a Jewish perspective, the opposite of being Avadim LeParo, slaves to Paro, is not being Ben Chorin. It's not being free. It's being Ovdei Hashem. The opposite of being servants to Pharaoh is being servants to God. The mitzvot are called the ol ha-mitzvot, the yoke of the mitzvot. The opposite of slavery is not being free to do whatever you want. It's being yoked to God. So I think that that's a very interesting way of thinking about slavery, but on another level, it's a very privileged intellectual question to be able to ask about how are we spiritually enslaved, right? We say b'chol dor vador to try to keep ourselves connected to the fact that there are people who are experiencing actual physical slavery. And we try to stay connected to that every year through the Seder so that we will have the compassion to care about people that are not in a position to think about the more fancy kinds of spiritual enslavement.
Can I just add 2 points before we go to the four children?
I am done. You finish. Go for it.
No. So one is to go back to what Rabbi Dalia was saying about the Heveti. Actually, since we've talked about Noam Sion and David Dishon's their amazing Haggadah, that is a Haggadah that includes the Heveti, which is a very strong modern Zionist statement to make. It's somewhat subversive, because in their Haggadah they do bring the Jewish people into the land of Israel, even though the traditional Haggadah did not. It studiously avoided getting all the way to the Promised Land. And then the other point I wanted to make is just this whole juxtaposition of physical and spiritual slavery. Actually, it starts with, you could see it starting with Kadesh and Orchatz, because the idea of spirituality in the Kiddush and physicality in the Orchatz, and actually that hand washing is totally physical. There is no blessing made. And so even from the beginning, those two are set against one another and juxtaposed.
Okay, I'm going to try to be very brief because we have 2 more sections and we want to have time at the end. So I just want to raise about the 4 children that, as if you don't already know this, why do we have 4 children in the first place? And the reason is that there are 4 different places in the Torah when the issue of your child asking you, what this whole story is all about come up in 4 different places. So the rabbis decide that these 4 different ways that the question is asked represent 4 different children. But I want to just point out, and the texts are here, and it might be an interesting thing to look at your Seder. I didn't put the answers there, just the questions. And if you take a look at the questions by themselves, it's not super clear, like which one is wise, which one is wicked, which one is simple. I think if you put these 4 questions in front of your Seder participants and said, okay, let's decide which one of these seems wise, which one of these seems wicked, you'll start to see that it's that these labels are not necessarily, they're not taking in the fact that lots of things, that they could all be seen in lots of different ways. And I just also, again, just for you for your Seders, but I'm not going to talk about it, I included the version of the 4 children in the Jerusalem Talmud, which has different designations that you might want to take a look at. I'm going to end there so that Rabbi Jack has some time to talk too.
Right. So the whole question of which, I'm still, sorry, Donnie, I am, or who the owner of the document is. Can you go back to the previous page? Just to show everybody right there, thank you, that in fact, the Haggadah already messages to us that we are meant to question the labels given to the 4 children. Because when the Torah gives it's actually 3 questions, and one is just the answer, which it would be the one who doesn't know to ask, and then also gives the answers. Every one of those 4 cases also has an answer. And so you would think when the 4 children are given statements in the Haggadah, you would think that it would just copy and paste from the Chumash. That basically the Torah is giving us 4 instances of telling the story of Mitzrayim. We have 4 children, so why not just cut and paste from the Torah to the Haggadah? And instead, what the Haggadah does is, for the most part, it mixes and matches the sources. It plays with the Torah language. And so in doing that, I think, first of all, it goes back to what Rabbi Ann is saying, that essentially what I think, by mixing and matching, it doesn't want to make the assumption that what the Torah is saying as a description of any of these children is exactly just meant to be taken without questioning. And then what I think that is also doing is it's modeling exactly what we're supposed to be doing in the Seder, which is challenging, asking questions, and problematizing the notion that we can actually label different children or people in a certain way. And just one final note also, which is that the question that is assigned to the wise child from Deuteronomy 6, there is an answer there. That answer is not what the Haggadah says you were supposed to give to the Chacham. Rather, the answer in the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy is Avadim Hayinu. And so in the Haggadah, by reading that together, we are making the statement that actually, again, undercuts this notion that it's so easy and simple to give labels. In fact, what that's saying is we are all the wise children. We're all learning the answer to the question that the Chacham had asked. I think this is me again. Okay, so Susan raised the question of the next one, right? So what page 8 has is the Jerusalem Talmud's version of the 4 children. So people can go back and look at this. We're on page 9, and Susan asked the question about Manishana Shana Hazot, right? What is different about this year? We all know this year is very different. And I thought the Makot, actually, a conversation about the plagues while we are in the middle of a pandemic, is very challenging. And we actually, in the 6th grade, they're in the middle of a Makot unit, and we thought long and hard about how to study it this year. And in general, in our classes where we're learning about Pesach and about the Seder, this was a really difficult question for us. And I just want to point out that we already have a tradition of, when learning the plagues, of problematizing the notion that a whole people should be punished this way. That there is a midrash from the Talmud. I have it here. I'll add the quote later. I'm sorry I didn't include it here. I mean the citation. But the quote is that there are angels wanting to sing after the plagues, and God says the work of my, I'm sorry, after the sea drowns the Egyptians who are pursuing the Israelites, trying to kill them a second time, the work of my hands are drowning at sea, and you wish to sing songs. And the context is a conversation about whether there should be any celebrating over the death of even of people who are not good. And the answer is no. All are God's creations. And so that addresses the question of, in the first place, whether the plagues are something that we should be comfortable with celebrating. And people are familiar with the tradition of spilling wine or grape juice out of your cup because we should be taking away from our happiness and our celebration because there were many people killed. And so that already problematizes the plagues. That doesn't necessarily make it easier this year in the context of a pandemic to talk about a plague, because it's not a faraway occurrence. It's not some abstract notion. It feels like we have a plague happening right now. And so in thinking of new traditions, one of the ideas that I would suggest maybe is saying the Makot quietly, or in other words, there's a tradition of certain passages in the Torah that are especially harsh, of having them said quietly. So maybe they can be said quietly this year as well. And I'd be interested in also in opening up or just asking people to think about how the plagues might be understood or ritualized differently this year at a time when so many people are dying or are at risk because of a plague.
Thank you, Rabbi Jack. I want to, with the same question in mind, I want to think about the Shvo Chamatcha, which is a prayer we recite when we open the door for Elijah, after we drink the third cup of wine, after we've completed our meal and completed grace after meal, we open our door for Elijah, and then we recite these words: pour out your wrath on the nations that do not know you, these very angry words that they go on, and I just brought a short quote from them that really call God sort of to exact punishment on those who do not follow God's path. So I want to just hold off on Shmo Chamatcha for a moment and just think about Eliyahu for a moment. Last week, no, I think it was just yesterday. Anyway, I participated in a Zoom Brit Milah. A friend in my community, in my synagogue, had a baby boy, and the circumcision was yesterday, and they held it in their kitchen, and we were all on Zoom. And when they put the baby on Elijah's chair, another friend of mine through the chat, we're saying both of us were filling up with tears. What a time to bring in Eliyahu. Eliyahu is the harbinger of good news and of good times, and that this baby being born brings in Eliyahu to our midst. And we do that at our Seder also. We bring Eliyahu in towards the end of our Seder, before we're ready to close with praise and to sing our songs. We bring in Eliyahu. But we bring Eliyahu in with a little bit of fear, because we're not fully sure that Eliyahu symbolizes hope. And we have a tradition of still shouting out in anger and shouting out in fear. The passage of Shvo Chamatcha has always bothered me, not this year in new. It's always, I've always struggled with expressing such desire for God to pour out God's wrath on anybody, even if they might be my enemies. I try to teach my child that we don't have enemies, and so I don't wish God's wrath on anybody. But I understand that we live in a world where we're scared. And there's a text beautifully translated here. There's a text known as Shvoch Ahavatcha. God, pour out your love on all these people. Bring them in through love. And a few days ago, there was a video going around. There are lots of videos going around now to bring in hope. And there was a video of the song of What the World Needs Now is Love. And the question of the suggestion to this year to talk about shpoch ahavatcha and to urge God to pour out God's love. We've been opening our window. We don't have a balcony, but we've been opening our window very widely at 7 p.m. every night. And in Riverdale, we've been hearing we can't really see much, and we've been hearing we've been hearing clapping from afar. And tonight, the clapping all around got much louder. People were clanking with dishes and with pots. And a new family that moved into Riverdale just earlier this year was on a balcony just across the way, and we had them over for Shabbat dinner, and my child recognized them and was waving and shouting at them. And I was thinking, I'm not a community organizer so much, and I was thinking, and I'm looking for partners, and I was thinking of, could there be a moment where in the night, at least one of our Seders, where we commit to opening our doors at the same time? In a time of social distancing, we're closing our doors. We're putting on masks, and we're closing doors, and we're hiding, if you will, and we're sheltering, and all for good reason. I don't want anybody to read me suggesting that we shouldn't be doing that. We should be doing that. But how can we open our door, not only for Elijah, but for each other, to bring in the love on Seder night? And so maybe we could choose a time at the Seder. We might not be there. We might not be all at that point in the Seder. And Seders some people take a lot longer, and some people, tell the story faster. But could we choose a time where some of us are opening the door together and seeing each other from afar or from close up, or opening the window or bringing in Elijah all together to express our hope that we can pour out the love and that we can fill this world with love and with prayers for healing and with prayers for safety. Because definitely in this time of pandemic, I don't wish God's wrath on anybody, not on the people that I hold dear to my heart, and not on the people who I don't know, and definitely not on the people who some people might think are my enemy. I pray for all of their safety and for them to experience God's love and God's grace this holiday and for many months to come. So with that, that's the end of our textual components. We're happy to take some comments and questions and suggestions from people before we formally close. So I'll ask Ariella if there are comments and suggestions from people who want to contribute, and otherwise, floor is yours.
Can we unshare the screen so we can see people's faces?
Yeah, great idea.
Does anyone have any questions or comments? That was very beautiful. I can't thank you enough. You're my dream team of rabbis, and this was wonderful, wonderful evening. Does anyone have anything to add or ask before we close? All right, well, we are going to post, we will post all of the materials from tonight on the Heschel Remote Hub. I plan to use them at my Seder. I hope that you will all be able to use them at your Seder. Thank you again to Rabbi Dalia, Rabbi Ann, Rabbi Jack for this incredible teaching. Please join us Monday night for one final Pesach program, readings and texts and songs on the theme of hope. We end our Seder with L'Shana Haba'a B'Yerushalayim, a forward-looking, optimistic idea. And so we're going to share a series of texts on hope. I hope between tonight and Monday night and our last program, you will be able to make your Seder exciting and warm and wonderful and special in positive ways, in addition to the ways that we all know this year will be special in ways that we wouldn't have hoped for. Thank you all for making the time. Thank you for bringing your faces to our communal learning. And again, thank you, Rabbi Jack, Rabbi Dalia, Rabbi Ann. Thank you always to the great Donnie Farkfitz, who keeps our remote school running minute by minute. Thank you all.
Tune in for Kabbalat Shabbat tomorrow at 4, where Donnie will be playing God. I'm not going to say anymore.
Dun, dun, dun. If that doesn't get you on, I don't know what will. Thank you, everyone. Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. Thank you again, rabbis.